Hello and welcome to this live Q&A hosted by the Cleft Lip and Palate Association on the subject of audiology. My name's Joanne Gecky and I've been a CLAPA volunteer for over 10 years, supporting mainly the parent side. I've got a 15-year-old teenager, a typical 15-year-old teenager I might add, that was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate. And today I'm joined by Sarah.
I'm Sarah Thomas. I'm also a parent supporter. I've been supporting for about 14 years-ish. I've got two daughters were born with cleft. The eldest was a bilateral complete cleft lip and palate, and the youngest is an unilateral. The eldest is 17, the youngest is 8.
Thank you, Sarah. Today's session is all about audiology and cleft lip and palate. We'd like to welcome cleft specialist Victoria Parfect, who will be answering your questions. Victoria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you. Firstly, thank you to CLAPA for letting me come and speak about hearing and glue ear and communications and all the things that I'm really excited about. And I'm the lead audiologist for my local cleft network. I've been in that position for quite a while, and that's given me an opportunity to meet loads of families and professionals all working within the sort of cleft world and within cleft teams. So hopefully I'll be able to answer the questions that people have put forward, and thank you for people putting forward questions in advance. I do need to say that I can only answer the questions from a local perspective. There are variations across the country and across networks. That's just because of the different ways that audiology and ENT services are set up. I'm an audiologist, so I'm not a medic, I'm not an ENT, but I will answer the questions as best I can around grommets, but just please be aware of the limitations that I can offer as an audiologist. Also, there are variations in audiology services and what's available through different services. So I'll try and give a broad approach to most of the questions. And unfortunately, as many of you will have already experienced, COVID has had further impacts on local services, and as professionals, we don't like to have waiting lists, and we don't like to have the changes to our service that COVID has brought, but that may have meant that there are some other variations that I can't sort of speak to. What I would say is that yes, we're busy, but if you've got a question that's specific, I would always recommend someone go to their local service, either their local cleft team or their local audiology or ENT service, speak to them. And if you haven't got a reply, it may be because we're busy, and just do another push, or maybe just ask another question, send another email, because we will want to help and we will want to answer. It's just, you know, a pressured time for everyone at the moment. So yeah, go to your local service if it's a specific question, but otherwise I'll see what I can do with the questions we do today. Hopefully I'll cover enough that's interesting and relevant to everyone.
Thank you, Victoria, for joining us today. And thank you as well to everyone who submitted a question in advance. If you have any questions while watching, please pop it in the comments and someone from CLAPA will either respond directly or pass it on to us, and we'll try and answer it for you. Right, on with the questions. First question was, I am expecting a baby with a cleft. I've heard that glue ear is common amongst cleft children. Why is it? Why is it so common? And how is it treated?
Yeah, so it's a really good initial question. And first of all, you get lots of information, and you, on top of everything else that you've been hearing about, you hear about this hearing difficulty and glue ear, and if you've never come across it before, it is confusing to understand what that is. So what I'd quite like to do is just take the opportunity to talk through a model, using a model and a diagram of an ear, because it's a bit easier, I find, than trying to abstractly talk about the ear. So talk about what glue ear is. So if I'll try and see if this model will show up well for the video. So this is a model of the ear. We've got the outer ear, the bit that we can all see. Then this goes in here to the ear canal. Then you've got your eardrum. Behind your eardrum, you've got your middle ear space. This is where you can get glue ear. And then linking the middle ear space down to the back of the nose and throat is the eustachian tube. Glue ear occurs in this space here. If I show you that on a diagram, which expands it a bit wider, ear canal, tympanic membrane or eardrum, middle ear space. You've got the three little bones here, which are called the ossicles, which are the smallest bones in our body. What happens is sound comes through, it vibrates the eardrum, which in turn moves these little bones. This pushes the sound into the cochlea, the underlying hearing or the permanent area of hearing for coding, that then sends information up the auditory nerve to the auditory cortex, which is the hearing center in the brain, to interpret sounds. Glue ear occurs in this space. Now this space is normally full of air. You can most often tell that when you go up in a plane or through a tunnel, you can feel your ears popping, or you can feel the change of pressure in the air. So as you're going up in a plane or down in a plane, the pressure in that middle ear space is constantly having to change in response to the pressure in the cabin. So that's where you can really feel that your ear, that middle ear, is full of air. With glue ear, you get a build-up of fluid in this space, and it's called glue ear because the fluid is a slightly sticky texture. It's a bit thicker than water. So you've got fluid in this space rather than air. And if you imagine with fluid in the space, as the sound comes through, the eardrum can't move as well, the middle ear bones can't move as well, and we're listening through a fluids-filled space rather than air. So if you think about listening above a swimming pool rather than below, there's a different quality to sound, and there's a different way that sound acts through those different mediums, so through air or through fluid. The fluid builds up there for a variety of reasons. Firstly, glue ear is incredibly common in all children. Up to 80% of children before the age of 3 will have experienced at least one episode of glue ear. Glue ear in and of itself isn't a problem. It just depends whether it's persistent and whether it's impacting on hearing, such that it could impact on confidence, behaviours, speech, educational attainment. So it's very common to have a hearing assessment in the winter for a small child to say they've got some glue ear, because we know that children's anatomy, particularly this eustachian tube, is a lot smaller. So for a small child, the eustachian tube sits horizontally. For an adult, we have an angle on our eustachian tube, about 30 degrees, and that helps drain away the fluid, and it also helps this middle ear stay aerated or well pressurized. With little ones, when their tube is flat, the tube is opened when we yawn and swallow, and it's opened by the palate muscles. So one of the palate muscles will help with opening the tube, and one will support the opening of the tube. So you can then see where the link could be coming with where you've been born with a palate where the palate muscles aren't quite aligned in the correct position. They may not have the same action on that eustachian tube, and that might mean that that tube isn't working quite as efficiently. If it's not as working as efficiently, and if we're not topping up that middle ear space with air, if I like to think of it, if we think of a balloon and the air comes out of a balloon, because this middle ear space is always having its air being used, it's always on a sort of a negative being used. If the air comes out of a balloon, the balloon would suck in. The body can't let that happen because it would suck the eardrum in too much, and it could damage or move on those middle ear bones. So what the body does is when it recognizes this middle ear space is in a particular negative pressure, it can leak fluid into the middle ear. So you can see then that depending on how the eustachian tube's working or how efficiently that's working and regulating the pressure or air in this middle ear space, if it's not working as well, then the body can leak fluid into the middle ear space, and that's glue ear. The other reason that you can get glue ear, which is why it's so common in all children, is whenever you have leaking in your mucous membrane, so you've got congestion, cold, allergies, anything that creates mucus can also create that sort of congestion leaking into this space, which is why with a heavy cold, as adults, we can often feel that our ears feel a bit blocked up, and that may be that you've got a little bit of congestion there. But for adults, we've got that angled eustachian tube, we can blow our nose, we can get rid of the congestion, we can clear it effectively, and And so we recover from that blocked feeling much more quickly. But with children, that tube is sitting flatter, it's very sticky. Even if it's opening, it might not be draining fully. If they can't clear the middle ear fluid, then we say that they've got glue ear that's hanging around. Now, we know that glue ear for a child, it can take up to 12 weeks for a child to clear glue ear completely, which is why when you have your hearing assessments, it may be that someone says your child's got glue ear, this is what the hearing levels are, and we're going to see you again in 3 months. That's because we know that if we assess you again in 3 months, we can assess the persistence of the glue ear to see whether it's staying around or whether it's due to a isolated incident of a cold or a seasonal variation where actually your child's anatomy will be able to clear it in time. But we think that children born with a cleft of the palate, because of the interactions between the palate muscles and that tube, it's all interrelated. We think because of that, they are more common to getting glue ear, and that's why we monitor them for glue ear. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
Yeah,
Great.
Brilliant, good. The other things that we know about glue ear is that it's really difficult for parents or caregivers to identify it. Glue ear doesn't mean that you're not hearing. It doesn't mean that you suddenly don't hear anything. You can still hear because we've still got good underlying hearing. If we've only got glue ear and no underlying hearing problems, if you've got an underlying hearing problem, you will be told that by your local hearing professional, your audiologist. If you've got good underlying hearing, if we've just got glue ear here, what we need to do is get the sound loud enough to get through that fluid space to the underlying hearing, then we can hear it, and then we still process the sound. So if you think about if you're in the bath and you put your head under the bath water and a family member calls you, you've just relaxed, and the family member calls you and it's like, oh, Mum, Dad, I need this, where are my shoes, something like that. You can hear which family member's spoken to you. You will know what they've said, but it won't be crisp or defined or really clear. Now, as an adult, we've got all this experience of language, so we can interpret all of those sounds and we can work out what's been said. But for a child that's learning those sounds and learning how those blends of sounds go together to make words, you can see that sometimes that can make the words indistinct or less clear, which therefore can impact on speech, and that can sometimes have an impact then on confidence or behavior. In our language, some sounds are louder and stronger, like the vowel sounds tend to give us strength and volume to our words, whereas some of the consonants give us intelligibility. So those loud power vowels, for example, in something like that, you can hear that strong at. But if you're saying that or cat, you can hear the strong at, but the th or the k might be difficult to hear the difference. We would know the difference because it would generally be in context and we'd know the sentence. But when you're learning language, that's why we so proactively monitor hearing. Within the cleft sort of community and within the cleft protocols and service, we regularly monitor hearing, but that is a really good thing. So yes, it's another thing to think about, and it's another appointment to attend, and you can think, oh, I need to think about hearing as well, and I'm trying to think about surgeries, and I'm trying to think about speech. But by proactively monitoring the hearing, it means that we should be able to identify glue ear or hearing difficulties before it gets to a point where you're concerned as a parent that children aren't hearing or it's impacting on speech. So rather than being a reactive service in cleft, where we know children born with a cleft may be more likely to have glue ear or are more likely to have glue ear, we're really proactive. And actually the whole protocol is that we actively see you and we'll regularly monitor your hearing all the way up until school entry and up into that year 5 at least, just to check that your hearing is where it needs to be for speech and language, early babble, early development, and then moving into preschool, being aware of where your hearing status is, or your child's hearing status is. And then as we go into that reception and year 1, where we're trying to learn all those phonic blends and the building blocks for our educational input and our educational development. So, you know, we act to proactively manage it. So that's what it is and how common it is. How it's treated. as I just said, glue ear in itself, it's not something to be concerned about, and we will monitor, and you will always get information from your audiologist or your ENT team as you get the assessments. So children born with a cleft of the palate will have the newborn hearing screen like every child has. Then they will get their first targeted screen around 8 or 10 months. At that point, it will be individualized care. So at that point, if you've got glue ear, then it may be that your next appointment is in 3 months. If everything is okay at that point and there's no glue ear or congestion or middle ear effusion or otitis media, they all mean the same things, and you may see those words written in reports. But if you haven't got glue ear at that point, your audiologist might say, well, we'll see you in 6 months. That's fine as well, because each next test point is dependent on the result of your last test point. But what is definitely the case is that you should have at least yearly appointment. So if you have no problems with glue ear, no difficulties, you'd have a yearly appointment up to that age of 5, just to keep a check on it so that we can work with the speech and language therapists within the Cleft team. So if we identify glue ear, as I said before, the first assessment we would normally say, we'll see you in 3 months. And that would be called watchful waiting. And that means that we've noted it, we're going to see if it's persistent, we're going to see if it changes, we're going to see if it fluctuates. And at that point, I'm thinking about communication tactics, which would be helpful for all children. So, sorry, did someone ask something? No. So if we're thinking about glue ear, and I've given the analogy of if you're listening under bathwater, if we think about how it might feel to have glue ear and what the impact of that glue ear might be, if you consider that I asked you for the next week or 2 weeks to go to work, maybe wearing earplugs, you might feel quite disorientated, you may feel a bit disconnected. As an adult, we have quite a predictable lifestyle, so we normally know what our friends tend to talk to us, what our colleagues tend to talk to us about at work. You kind of know your working day, but there may be times in that day where you would maybe avoid a busy place or a place where you're a bit worried if you might not hear someone. Depending on your personality, you may think, oh, I'm going to have my lunch just quietly on my own, or I'm going to take a walk. But depending on your personality, it will affect you in different ways. But if you were asked to wear those earplugs, you'd feel quite disorientated. Then if I asked you to take an earplug out and just have one, again, it would be another change that you'd have to get used to. And then you might need to put the earplug back in, and that would be another change. And that fluctuating nature as the glue ear thickens or thins can happen with children. And the same is so for children, depending on their personality. So some children with glue ear will become really centre in their communication. They'll become loud and really central. So they want to manage the conversation, then they know what's happening, they don't feel they're going to miss out, and they get quite loud in themselves. Some children might get quite quiet, quite soft, and quite withdrawn. And so it's not always obvious that hearing will result in a what? Pardon, I haven't heard. Sometimes glue ear or hearing difficulties might present in a behavioural change, or a confidence change, or the teacher may report to you that they feel like your child's daydreaming or not being able to quite concentrate. Children might be quite tired towards the end of the week because they've got so much more listening effort to get through with glue ear than their peers, so they may appear frustrated or tired. So those are some other things to look out for. But if we know about glue ear and we know about those things, in that watchful waiting period, and good for everyone, is with that watchful waiting, letting other caregivers be aware. So if your child's at nursery, letting the key worker know. If your child's at school, letting the teacher know, maybe seeing if there's any possibility of preferential seating so that your child could come a bit further forward. Often at school, we're given new topics, suddenly new information, new words that we don't have the context to build around for children. You know, you're suddenly told about fossils or Africa or all these different things where it's new language all the time. If you know your child has got glue ear and they're struggling, if you have a parent's consultation, if you can just find what they're going to be studying in that term, that can be really helpful, because you can just introduce some of the vocabulary, not turning yourselves into teachers, but just introducing the vocabulary at home. Because you know yourself, if you're talking to someone in a busy environment and you can catch a word, you can normally follow the conversation a bit more. And it's just giving your children those word catches to catch hold of. Oh, I've heard that vocabulary before, I know a fossil, okay, I can follow it a little bit more. So with watchful waiting, I would really advocate for everyone good communication tactics. Good communication. Don't shout with glue ear, it distorts your voice and it changes the frequency. Get closer and just speak clearly. That's the best way, not for shouting. For little children, if you've got hard floors and things like that at home, put a mat down, have playtime in a softer listening environment, reduce background noise. If the radio's on, but it doesn't need to be on because you're all having a conversation over the dinner table, turn the radio off, or put the washing machine on after dinner to try and reduce background noise. For little ones, if you're playing with them and you've got hard surfaces, if you're doing like a stacking game and you're going up, 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 oh crash, at the oh crash, or oh bang, oopsie, at that time, your words may be covered up by the crash on a hard surface. So it's just thinking about reading time in a quiet environment, in the sitting room where you've got soft furnishings that absorb the sound, or just putting that mat down, reduce it, turning the television off if you start playing and they get really into play, reducing that so that we can really focus on language rich times. So for little ones, language rich, nice soft environment. As we get older, making sure that caregivers are aware, teachers, nursery workers, etc., are aware that we've got glue ear or congestion, and speaking clearly, trying to check if they've heard what's been said, or trying to use their name to cue them in. For children, older children, if they've got glue ear and they're feeling bunged up, sometimes you might go, Billy, Billy, Billy. And if the third time is the first time they've heard themselves being called, you're naturally on the third call at a slightly more frustrated sounding voice. So touching someone, going up to their room to call them rather than calling from downstairs, getting their attention before important information, and then just talking clearly, not needing to shout. And so that would be, for me, watchful waiting would be watchful waiting, but knowing what glue ear is like, thinking, how would that be making me feel? Can I see that in my child? And how might we make some changes just to make it a bit easier and make it a bit less effortful? Does that make sense for communication and watchful waiting?
Yep.
Then after a period of watchful waiting, you may be offered grommets, or you might be offered hearing aids. Grommets are a surgical approach where there is a small insertion put in the eardrum. That's all done through the ear canal, so they have to be at a certain size for that to be possible, and the eardrum has to be at a certain size to allow that to be optimally placed. This is where we put a grommet in the eardrum, and they would suck out the fluid and place the grommet into the eardrum. The grommet isn't stitched into place, it's just placed in the hole and then it heals up tight, and then the grommet will grow out over time. Or a hearing aid is a hearing aid that may go behind the ear or may go on the head on a band via bone conduction, and I'll talk about this a bit later, and that then gives a boost to the sounds to make it easier to hear the sounds rather than getting rid of the glue ear. So those are our options. Communication tactics for everyone at every stage, really important. Grommets or hearing aids if it's persistent and affecting hearing and it's at a level where your care team have determined that you need some help to relieve that glue ear or to give better hearing.
There's a question from the chat. Is glue ear genetic? And is it more likely for children to have persistent glue ear if parents have also had persistent glue ear?
It's a good question, and to be honest, I'm not sure of the answer. I do see families where children have experienced glue ear and there's a really strong family history. I don't know if that's the glue ear in and of itself, or maybe the genetics of the anatomy, you know, where we have sort of similar shaped faces, etc. So I don't know entirely, but I definitely have seen people, families where they felt that there's a very strong glue ear history, and I've seen a strong glue ear history through the parents and siblings. So I'm not sure about the genetics of it, though, I'm afraid.
Okay. You happy for question 2?
Yeah.
Question 2 is, my son failed his hearing test today, and I've read that babies born with a cleft can face problems. What can we expect to happen next?
Okay. So all children have a newborn hearing screen when they're first born, and children can not pass that newborn hearing screen initially for a variety of reasons. It may be that they've got a hearing loss or a hearing difficulty, or it may be that they have fluid in their ears from birth and it's difficult to pass the test signal through the ears and get the response that we need. So the screen puts in a test which is at a certain level, and it gives us a clear response or a non-clear response. That's all the screen will be able to do. After the screen, you get referred to someone like me, where they would do what's called a diagnostic hearing test. With a diagnostic hearing test, to you as parents, it will look very similar to the screen, same setup, same sort of probe or little sticky pads put on the ear with a headphone, but we are able to adjust the levels and look at what levels your child's being able to respond to and at what levels it's difficult for them to respond to. And then based on that diagnostic hearing check, we'll be able to give you more clear idea of what sort of sounds are clearly accessible, what are harder to hear, and what the next plan would be. For some children, the next plan might be, we'll review you at the targeted follow-up, which I'd said before. The next point that all children born with a cleft of the palate would get is that targeted follow-up at 8 to 10 months. So we might do the diagnostic screen and say, okay, with the results of this, we can see some glue ear, and we would follow you up then. Or it may be that you get the diagnostic assessment and you're recommended another management depending on the type of hearing difficulties your child has at that time.
Okay. Next question. We've been given the choice between grommets and hearing aids. I think you touched on that earlier, and we're struggling to make a decision. What should we consider?
Okay, this is a difficult question to answer, and I am going to start off with it is individual, and that's not me fudging the question, I promise. So if I try and explain them a little bit more, maybe that will explain why it's individual. Firstly, if you've been given a choice by your local team, that means that there is a choice and both options are valid. But it's really strange because often I find with my families is that at the hearing point, it's the first point potentially in the cleft pathway where someone said, well, we can do this or we can do this. It's not, we're going to plan this surgery and then we're going to plan this surgery. You get to that point and then you're given a choice, and that is overwhelming, and you don't know what to do for the best. But if they have said both options are available and both options are an option, looking at your child's hearing, looking at your child's hearing levels, then they will both be a valid option. So I want that to take a little bit of weight off your shoulders in terms of thinking, am I going to make the right or wrong choice? They are both a valid option if you've been given both choices. Okay. And if you haven't been given both choices, that's because the caregivers have felt that this is more the way that we need to go, and they will be able to explain that to you. And you can always ask that question. If you're not sure and you think, but what about that option? I've heard about that option. Just ask. People might not know that you've heard about that option, but they'll be always happy to answer and explain why they might have been talking about this rather than this. They'll be able to talk it through. So grommets and hearing aids. So grommets, as I was saying, they're always done under a general anaesthetic. It's not because they are a long surgery, but it's because everything goes through the ear and the child needs to be still. Then the grommet is placed in a little hole in the eardrum, and then the grommet will last an average of possibly 6 months, maybe 6 to 12 months. It really depends. Sometimes if you get unfortunate and you have an ear infection or a really heavy cold, it might not last as long. But the grommets are a temporary measure. They grow out. Just like your fingernail grows, your eardrum will grow the grommet out and push it out. And the idea behind the grommet is the way that they're shaped, that they're grown out into the ear canal and the eardrum heals up behind them. Now, obviously, with grommets, then we've got a surgery, a general anaesthetic. You've also got an opening in your eardrum to the outside world. So some children may have infections with that, and they grow out over time. You still need monitoring your hearing, because you need to monitor when the grommets have come out. I'm not an ENT surgeon, so I'm afraid I can't go into any more detail on grommets than that. And any particular facts and figures around the infection rates or the particular duration for the grommets, I would defer you to the surgeon that's discussing them with you. And they would go through a consent form, just as you have to go through consent forms with the other surgeries that you've experienced through the Cleft team. And they would discuss those points. With the hearing aid, we're not getting rid of the glue, so it will still sit there, but we're amplifying sounds to get over the hearing difficulty, to overcome the hearing difficulty. Still a valid option, still a great option for giving access to sounds. Hearing aids, you can either have ones that go behind the ear and the sound goes through the ear, or you may have them on a headband. The ones that go behind the ear are amplifying the sound to make the sound loud enough to travel through the middle ear space where there's the glue ear to the underlying cochlea, and then to code the sounds to make sounds louder and clearer. They can be tuned to your child's hearing loss. So depending on the child's audiogram, which is their test results, they can be tuned to match that, to make sure that we're giving the right boost to the right sounds in speech and the right balance of sounds. Hearing aids aren't like a radio. It's not like just turning up the volume. Your child may or may not be given a volume control, which will have a small amount of volume in, but it's not the case that if they fiddle with them, they're suddenly going to overload themselves with sound or have no sound. And it's also not the case that hearing aids amplify all sounds by the same degree. They will amplify quiet, soft speech sounds more, but they won't be amplifying loud sounds to the same amount. So it's not that you put a hearing aid on and then suddenly loud sounds are way louder as well as speech being louder. They're more sophisticated than that, and they're more tuned to try and identify access to speech sounds and to amplify up the speech sounds into the audible range. Headband hearing aids, where you've got a little vibrating box, which is called a bone conductor hearing aid. That works by missing out the area of glue ear and going direct to the underlying hearing, the cochlea. That's buried in this mastoid bone here. So we site the bone conductor on here, and the bone vibrations send the information, amplify the sound, send the information directly through to the underlying hearing. Again, they're programmed for your child's hearing loss, and then the sound goes up to the hearing brain, hearing area in the brain, to interpret and to learn our language or interpret what's being asked of us. So those are the two options. Hopefully that goes one way in terms of you thinking about, okay, which options do we go for? With the hearing aids that fit over the ear, your child will have a little mold taken of the ear, and that will fit just their ear, and then the hearing aid will fit over the top. Often the mold can be a colour, and sometimes the hearing aid behind the ear bit can be a colour as well. It just depends on the services and the aids that are available. For both options, you need to come back to audiology departments to get hearing monitoring. For hearing aids, to see if the hearing aids need to be tuned. For grommets, to check that the grommets are still in place and working optimally. When I say it's really individual, it will depend on your child's previous experiences. It will depend on your thoughts around surgery. It will depend on whether your child would tolerate something on their head or on their ear. If they're always pulling off hats and can't tolerate hair clips, that's not to say they wouldn't tolerate hearing aids, because if they try the hearing aids and they really like the sound, they could be able to do that. But these are the sorts of considerations that you may put in Equally, sometimes when you've tried hearing aids, and if for some reason your child hasn't got on with them or it's been difficult, then it may be that you would try hearing aids in the first instance, and then if that wasn't the optimal solution for you and your family, then you may consider the other option of grommets. Do you think that answers that question, guys?
Yeah, there's a question from the chat again. Can children go swimming with grommets in?
Okay, so the grommets, again, I'm not ENT. Unfortunately, we were going to have ENT with us, but that wasn't possible. So often they require some water safety at the beginning. As I said, they're not stitched into the eardrum, they're just placed in. So ENT teams often will advise some water protection for the first period while the grommet's healed in place. And I would definitely ask your ENT surgeon around what they would recommend around swimming. You can get swim plugs to try and stop water going into the ears, but ask your ENT because they will give you advice for how long you might do just water protection for, and that might be that they'd say actually just avoid swimming for X amount of weeks, but after that time we'd be happy for you to go. So I would ask your local team. But yes, there is normally some early water protection, and depending on your child's case, which you need to speak to your ENT surgeon about, will depend on how long that water protection would last for. But you can get swim plugs and headbands, earbands, which can put swim plugs and then an earband to try and stop water going in the ears.
So the next question is that I've been told that my child can't have more grommets. What options are there for us? But I think you've answered quite a bit of that with the hearing aids and what have you. But
yeah, hearing aids would be a great option for that. When you've been used to having grommets and then it feels like, oh, I can't do grommets again, sometimes families feel a little bit daunted by the hearing aids or a little bit concerned about how children might accept the hearing aids or how their peers might accept the hearing aids. In my experience, if you're having difficulties with the hearing and then we fit hearing aids, I've seen lots of children who have had grommets before, have experienced grommets and experienced hearing aids, and when they're wearing the hearing aids, they can really hear the benefit. If you've already had some grommets inserted, it probably means your child is that little bit older, because you would have had grommets inserted and then a time when they'd grown out of them. When children are that bit older and they realise that the hearing aids are giving benefit, particularly benefit in school, giving better access to you guys at home, to their friends, what their friends are saying, what their teachers are saying, then often they're really happy to wear the hearing aids, and the hearing aids can give them a real boost in confidence as well. With the hearing aids, you can build up the use of them gradually. So when you first get them, we'd always recommend just acclimatizing to them, getting used to them in the home environment, getting used to them where you're happy and confident so that your child is at the point where they can turn them off, on. If you've got a volume control, they can manage that. They can take them out if they need to. It's a bit harder putting them in sometimes, but often if they can manage them well, then it means that you can then introduce them in the school environment because your child will be more able to manage their own hearing aids. But often a common concern that parents ask me about is how will they accept the hearing aids? And for the vast majority, in the scenario that this parents asked, I found that the children have really taken to the hearing aids and really like them, and it's really helped with their confidence because it's felt like, this is really helping me, and I can hear back, and I've got something that can help me hear, and it makes me less tired towards the end of the day, less tired towards the end of the week. And if you're less tired, you can just be more relaxed, and there's less listening effort, and you can just be more involved and engaged and feel more connected.
Okay, next question. I've been told that grommets aren't an option for my child, but I've read that the other families are still being offered them. Why can't we have them?
Yeah, so like I said, I can only talk on the local knowledge, and I would ask you to just speak it through with your team. Some teams will use hearing aids, a non-surgical approach, as their first line around glue ear, because we know that glue ear can resolve. When we put grommets in, it is a surgical procedure and we are putting a hole in the eardrum. And so every time you do that, it's like if you've got a cut, you can leave a little scar or a little mark on the eardrum. So there are, it may be that it's local policy that we would try a hearing aid first as a non-surgical approach, because we know that glue ear is fluctuating, and we know that glue ear is something that we'd anticipate children growing out of in early childhood. So it's not something that we're expecting way beyond into teenage years, although it can happen for longer for some families. But that's why we monitor up to 5 years, because lots of children by the age of 5 have grown out of the glue ear, because that eustachian tube angles down at around an average age of 6 or 7. That's an average, so some children hold on to glue ear for longer, and some children clear glue ear for earlier, and some children will have no difficulties with glue ear. But it will depend on your child's individual case. It may depend on the type of hearing difficulties they've got, where they feel that grommets wouldn't be the best option. Depending on the hearing loss or the thresholds that are affected, it may be that the risk benefit of the grommets doesn't match the hearing loss, and so that a hearing aid would be a more beneficial option. The treatment and management approaches really are discussed individually and really are tailored to the hearing, the audiograms and the hearing history, and tracking the hearing that we've got, rather than there being a one option that would be first for everyone and a second option, and then after you've tried that option you move to this option, to this option. So it may be that the best option for you isn't grommets, and there are a variety of reasons why that may be the case. But I'd also speak to your local team about that if you feel that it's more of a policy. There's a lot of a move around trying hearing aids first as the non-surgical approach, and seeing what the glue ear is doing whilst wearing the hearing aids, and giving that option for the glue ear to resolve spontaneously. But speak to your local team. It's a valid question. Ask them.
Next question is, my son keeps pulling his hearing aid out. I can't get him to leave it alone. Do you have any tips to help?
Okay, first of all, breathe and just give yourself a break, because generally when parents speak to me and are feeling like they just keep pulling the hearing aids out, it's really stressful, it's really frustrating, and you're worrying that you're not doing the best or the most optimal thing. So think about your son, your family, and think about just taking a breath, stepping back from it, and thinking about a new approach to trying them. What I'd recommend is that, first of all, when was your last hearing check? Just get your hearing check to make sure that their hearing hasn't fluctuated. As I've said, glue ear can fluctuate, it can improve, it can thin, so your hearing improves, or it can thicken up and it can get worse. So just check the hearing, because if for any reason your son's hearing's improved, he could be pulling them out because they're feeling a bit overwhelming for him. If you're thinking, no, Victoria, that's not it, we've had the hearing checks, his hearing's always at the same level, but he just doesn't want to tolerate the hearing aids and he pulls them out, think of a time when it's a good time for all of you to try them. So, for example, putting them on and then everyone having to get into the car and on a school run or anything is not going to be a nice, language-rich, beneficial time for the hearing aids. It may be that you say, right, I'm doing all the busy stuff in the morning, depending on the age of your son, and at this time, we're going to put the hearing aids in, but we're going to put them in for something that he really enjoys and that he can hear the benefit from them. And we're just going to use them for that. So start small. So if it's a book, we're going to sit and we're going to read a book. I'm going to put them in and I'm going to give him some finger puppets to work with the book, and we're going to go through the book, or we're going to have a toy, or we're going to have something that's a distraction, and we're going to talk with the book. And at the end of the book, you can take them out. So you've taken them out before the point where he's got frustrated, or you got worried and stressed that he's then pulled them out. And it's tempting, if that works, that first step, to think, oh, I'll keep them in. But then you might get to the point where he pulls them out and throws them, and then you think, oh, it didn't work for that much longer. So do it with a bit of a distraction, do it in a calm time, giving yourself a break, making sure it's a good time for you as a parent, a time when you can put them in and then sit and do something with, and then take them out, and build it up slowly like that. And then the next time we'll do it a bit later on that day for another bit of language rich work, another bit of time where it's like, wow, these make a difference, and I'm really enjoying that nursery rhyme if they're little, or I'm really enjoying this time. Sometimes when they're a bit older, it might be that it's situational based, and that children end up wearing the hearing aids in school, but they come home and they just think, I want to have a break at that point. And okay, have a break. They might go back in for the TV watch later on if they do that, or for the story later. But think about, what do we want them to hear through the hearing aids? And when we put them on, is that what they're accessing? And if it's that you're thinking, okay, they're going and they're just being thrown and thrown, just a little bit, a little activity, take them out. Do everything else with good communication, with a really nice listening environment, and then at another point putting them back in. If you've got younger children, something that I often say with Glue Ear is that, you know, hearing is access to this wonderful world of language. So with little ones, so if your son is a little one, just being aware of how much language you're using, even if he's pulling the hearing aids out and you can't get them in, just keeping your language flowing, keeping a good communication environment and speaking to them. So for example, if you've got Glue Ear and you haven't heard the ping on the washing machine, so you haven't tottered across to look at the washing machine because you love the washing machine, because the washing machine is a great TV show, and so you haven't seen it go round. So if your child hasn't heard the little ping and hasn't gone, you won't say, oh, it's stopped, oh, it's whooshing round, oh, it's gone into the spin, look at it go fast, I can see your sock in there, oh, is it going to stop, is it going to stop, oh, it's stopped, okay, are you going to help me open the door, click, let's open the door, let's get the things out. So it's just being mindful that keep your language going, because often a child's response means that we talk to them more. So if you know that they've got some Glue Ear, and if you've got a child that you're trying to get that management going, but they're struggling with their hearing aids and they're younger, it's just making sure that you're kind of talking through things rather than always waiting for that child to turn to a sound or a something to initiate that conversation. It's like if you're making lunch, I often say our early, when I'm speaking to parents about early intervention and early babble, if your child's up at a high chair and then they're hearing you in the kitchen nearby, or a microwave's pinging, or you're opening a fridge and they look at you and they make a sound, then you're going to say, oh, we're going to have some cheese. Should we have some cheese for your lunch? I'm going to chop the cheese. Oh, this is yummy cheese. And you speak to them. Whereas if they're on the high chair and they're playing, but they've not heard something and they've not made that first interaction as you've made like a chink of their spoon or something, you might still do all of that. Oh, here's your cheese and I've chopped your cheese. But they might hear cheese 3 times versus 5 times or 6 times, where they've looked over in response to, that's my cutlery sound, or that's the microwave sound, or food's coming. So it's just keeping background noise to a minimum and talking and using your language. And you don't have to beat yourself up about this. You don't have to be talking all the time. It's just, if you're aware that they've got Glue Ear, making sure that you're still talking through the things, even if they haven't heard that initial thing that makes that first interaction, because they'll still do all that lovely interaction with you with Glue Ear, but sometimes you just need to cue them into it. I'm sorry, I went really off piece with that, trying to get your child to wear your hearing aid. But yeah, think about the time for you. Don't beat yourself up about it. Go slowly, build it up, get their hearing checked, and speak to your local team as well to see if they've got any tips. The NDCS has also got tips on how to get your child to wear hearing aids. So that's the National Deaf Children's Society. And they've got information on Glue Ear. They've got information on the different types of hearing aids, and they've got good, balanced, well-researched information on how to manage using hearing aids, but also the different types of hearing loss and interpreting audiograms. So that's a really good resource if you feel that you want to go to the internet.
That's really good, Victoria. I love that advice. So the next question, my daughter has been diagnosed with mild hearing loss due to glue ear. Audiology have offered standard hearing aids, or we could investigate specialist bone conduction hearing aids. I wondered if you could advise on which hearing aids are best and how children tend to respond to each kind.
So similar as I was saying with the grommet and the hearing aid choice, it's also, if you've been offered both, then both are an option. And so the team wouldn't have offered you both if they both weren't an option. Sometimes when you're not offered both, if a child's hearing is at a certain level or changing a lot between different tests, you may only be offered a bone conduction hearing aid, and that's because it's quite difficult to tune the hearing aids that go all the way through the system to make sure they're always giving the right level of amplification, if that makes sense. Whereas with the bone conduction, because it's going directly to the underlying hearing, it doesn't matter if the glue ear here is thickening and thinning and if the hearing is fluctuating, because we're always going direct to the underlying hearing. So think about what your daughter's hearing profile is. Is it completely stable? Has she always got, I think you said mild, so she always got that sort of mild hearing loss? In which case the behind the ear hearing aid, that would give the correct amount of amplification. It would be ear level and with a little mold there. Or has she got a hearing loss that's really fluctuating and very different on each of your different assessments? If it's always quite different, it might be that you want to consider the one that goes to the underlying hearing, because then it doesn't matter how her hearing's fluctuating, but you always know you're getting a signal through to the underlying hearing levels. Again, speak to your local team and just say, I'm a bit confused. Which one would you go for given her audiograms or given her history and given how you've tracked her hearing? Which one do you think would give her best access to sound? So there's that side of it. So there's the audiology side of it, which is very much linked to the hearing history and the hearing tests. And there's also the acceptance side of it. And that might depend on your daughter's age, so or your child's age. So the bone conductors tend to always be sighted on a band. That might be a elastic band, like the elastic you'd have at the top of your trousers, that sort of elasticated band. It might look a little like a sweatband in some models, or it might be more of a harder band looking a bit more like a hairband. That's less common. But so the behind the ear hearing aids go here with molds in the ear. The bone conduction tends to be on a band on the head. So if you know that your child or your daughter is someone that will never tolerate an Alice band or a clip or would always be pulling that off, it may be that you feel that the better option is the behind the ear one, because if you're thinking about it as a family and as about who your child is, if you're given a hearing aid but they can't wear the hearing aid or they don't tolerate the hearing aid, then we know that the hearing isn't being managed, even though the hearing aid's been provided, and that means it's not giving a boost to hearing if it's not being worn. So yeah, I think about your child as an individual, and you can also ask your team about if they would recommend either one from an audiology point of view or from a test result point of view. I think if they've offered you both would be an option for you. So depending on your daughter's age, you could also show her the different models, and the NDCS again has got pictures of hearing aids, both the bone conductor one and the one behind the ear, and they've got information on glue ear and glue ear in children born with a cleft of the palate.
Ideal. So with the headband hearing aid things, how do you modify the hearing aid bands so they're more comfortable for little ones?
So I asked the team that issue the headband hearing aids here, because I don't tend to issue them very regularly myself, just as a bit of a disclaimer. So I did seek some advice, and they said primarily go and speak to your team, because if you're getting discomfort, you should talk to your team, because it may be that they could give you a different width of band, a different size of band, but they could also check the tension, because the way the bands work is they put the bone conductor onto the bones, but it has to go on with a certain amount of tension to make sure that the vibrations, which are the way that you hear through bone, the bone vibrations come through the skull. If they're too loose, the bone vibrations don't get through, and then you don't hear as clearly. So get them to check the tension, because it may be that they're on a certain size band, and the size of band could be changed, or the tension could be changed. Think about also your contact points in the day. So if the hearing aids are always here on a contact point, just shifting them slightly so that we're not always on the same contact point for the bone vibrations may be helpful. And the audiologist I spoke to said also sometimes if it's a girl, you might be able to, with hair clips and things, clip the band with the hair clips, and that might just either ease some of the tension, but not so much that you can't hear, or it might just mean that it's moving less, which might mean that they're less aware of it. Sometimes I've seen little boys that tend to wear them with hats, but again, that just depends on the time of year and what sort of environment they're in. You know, if they're in nurseries, but then if they're in schools, you can't really do that. So as with the hearing aid one, discussion that I had earlier, take a break as well. If you're finding that we're getting really upset and we're throwing it, take a break, do your books, do your stories, do your sideways stories, sit next to children, looking at them so they can see your mouth, talking through stories while they're on, and then having a break from the hearing aid, and then trying it again a little bit later.
Another question. I think you've actually answered some of this, but I've heard about bone conduction hearing aids on soft headbands. Will my child be offered one of these?
Yeah, so that is the hearing aid I've just been talking about, and it depends on the service. Your child will only be offered one if they're an appropriate aid for your child, and different services provide different ranges of hearing aids, all from different manufacturers. That doesn't mean that anything is better or worse, but it's just some different manufacturers. So you may be offered that as an option, or you may be offered a behind the ear, and that will also be a good option for amplifying sound to get over glue ear.
Cool. And last question we've got, unless there are any more from the chat, is that I was born with a cleft palate, and I remember having hearing issues as a child. I was always told I'd grow out of them. I'm now in my 30s and still have problems, so I'm not sure where to go for help. Should I ask my GP to refer me to the Cleft team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So generally, we would say that we would expect children to grow out of glue ear as their head develops more of an adult angle, the eustachian tube angles down, and your anatomy is more able to drain away the congestion. You're more able to blow your nose, clear any congestion, and you grow, and then you're able to regulate that middle ear space much better. That said, as in all of the population, some people do hold on to glue ear or have some more difficulties with their ears, be it through glue ear or be it through multiple infections for longer, and that continues through adulthood. And that can happen in the population that aren't born with a cleft of the palate, and if you've been born with a cleft of the palate. And my advice would be, if you've got that congestion in your ear, pain in your ear, troublesome sounds in your ear, then I would seek advice from your GP, just as if you had a recurrent infection or pain somewhere else. Just because you had it as a child and you remember having lots of difficulties as a child when you with hearing, if they're not resolving and they're causing you difficulties, or they're impacting on your day-to-day work or family life, you're finding difficulty hearing, or you're finding difficulty with discomfort, I would go to your GP and ask for a referral to get that investigated. Particularly, you know, if you're having a pain or infections, even if you always suffer with them with the child, go back. The NHS and hearing services are always evolving. From a hearing aid point of view, we're always getting updates and changes, and there may be options that are available now that weren't available when you were a child, or it may be that your work you don't really remember, but there may be some options that you were offered earlier that you didn't want them, but you would prefer to have now because your listening environment and your lifestyle has changed. So yeah, I would go to your GP. It's a really good question. I would go to your GP and ask to be referred so that you can just know what your hearing is doing and know what options are available to you and if there are any options available to you. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you very much. So that's all the time we have for tonight, I'm afraid. Thank you so much to Victoria for giving up your time to talk to us. It's hugely appreciated. I'm sure everybody watching feels the same way. Thank you as well to everyone who's joined us online. The video will be available on CLAPA's Facebook page straight away, and the subtitled version will be posted on the CLAPA website as soon as possible. If we didn't get around to answering your questions in the chat, remember you can get in touch anytime at info@clapa.com, where CLAPA staff can help point you in the right direction. Once again, thank you to Victoria for joining us. Thank you to everybody watching, both now and later on. We hope you enjoyed the Q&A, and we'll see you again at one of our upcoming online events in the future. From all of us, good night and have a lovely rest of the week.